New York Ranger fans, I promise, I'm not here to go out there and piss all of y'all off one more time. That is not my intention with this video. Instead, what I wanted to do was dive into a Vancouver Canucks related discussion, because when it comes to Rangers captain JT Miller, for some reason, whatever that may be, this guy's name does not seem to leave the mouths, the commentary, the subconscious thought process of Vancouver Canucks executives, media, and fans. Because last year, the Vancouver Canucks made the very bold and distinct decision of trading away JT Miller and keeping Elias Pettersson. There was a very well-documented rift in the locker room between these two guys. It was quite evident that they could not exist in the same locker room with each other, which is ridiculous when you consider the fact that they literally were able to do that for 5 years with no issues whatsoever. I mean, it was already evident that, oh, hey, these guys wouldn't play Xbox together, but they would be professional and they'd be cordial and they'd cooperate. They did that for 5 years. But then, something interesting happened in the summer of 2024, when Elias Pettersson dipped in production, and he also signed a new contract. It was around that time last year where management told JT Miller, hey, you know, that hard, brooding, kind of army sergeant type of style that you employ? We want you to push Pettersson to being better, and we want you to be the guy that eggs him to be his best self, because he just came off of a season that had a bad ending and he didn't really produce too well in the final months of that 2024 campaign. And Miller said, sure. And it got to a point where eventually one of them needed to be traded because they were so different and they could not cooperate any longer. Look at that, eh? Millionaires not finding the ability to be peaceful amongst their coworkers. But either way, JT Miller was traded, and now in New York, the guy's on pace for 48 points on the season. He's got 18 points in 30 games played. This is all coming after he started out his New York Rangers stint pretty well with 35 points in 32 games to end off 24-25. And I'll admit, it's been a really bumpy road for JT. He's actually been a point-per-game player the past few games over here. Okay, I say that, and he's got 2 pointless games in a row. But if you exclude these two, I mean, JT has finally started to get back into that production territory after having a whole bunch of on and off stints throughout the course of this year. Lo and behold, the Rangers just haven't been all too great. Miller is 32 years old. He's making $8 million a year till the end of 2030. And there still is this collective mindset among some Canucks fans that asks whether or not JT's presence on Vancouver would be better than Elias Pettersson's presence on Vancouver, even though Pettersson at the moment is slightly more productive than JT. PD is on pace for 63 points, JT is on pace for 48, so yeah, you can say that one is definitely more productive than the other. The reason I bring this up is because of a few tweets that I saw on Twitter. Take a look at what Arpon on BC went out there and said yesterday afternoon. He spoke out on the idea that Jim Rutherford keeps on bringing up, because if you hadn't noticed, almost every single time Vancouver Canucks management speaks out about the state of the team, there always seems to be some sort of an idea tossed out there that implies that the JT Miller trade was the beginning of the end. Arpon says this: I really don't like the notion that Rutherford keeps throwing out there that if it wasn't for Miller and Petey, things would have been fine, and how that came about was unpredictable. This is absolutely the case because Jim Rutherford will continually bring this up. Oh, we weren't expecting that JT and Petey would get into what they got into. We weren't expecting that we needed to trade one of them. And if it wasn't for that, we'd still be a team that's on the up and up and we'd be able to contend. Like, that's sort of the thought process, the underlying emotional response from a lot of what Rutherford says to the media these days. And Arpon is saying here, I don't like that Rutherford keeps on bringing that up. Because one, the Vancouver Canucks originally chose Bo Horvat and then they pivoted. Number 2, they overpaid Petey and handled that entire situation wrong. And number 3, they overpaid players every year. Now, this is where we dive back into the defending Rutherford segment, or you can say maybe it's not directly defending Rutherford, but it is playing devil's advocate. It's Mr. Thomas Drance who goes out there and directly replies, Miller is 32 years old, signed on for 5 more years, on pace for 50 points, and he hasn't moved the needle for the 12th place team in the Eastern Conference. If the Vancouver Canucks sees the Miller trade as the reason why they're no longer an ascending team, as opposed to being an obvious bullet dodged, they're cooked. And I love that Drance does not shy away from using Gen Z language in this way. Yeah, no, if Vancouver views the Miller trade as the reason they're not contending anymore, rather than it being a bullet dodged, they're cooked. And you have some replies going out there and saying this. He's only making 2C money, and if he ends up being all right for the next 5 years, that's good value in the rising cap world. Drance goes out there and says, this isn't about Miller versus Petey. This is about a trade that the Canucks view as a setback that was actually a great escape. If they can't see that clearly, they can't win a Hughes trade, or do anything else right either. And I love that Drance is bringing the heat over here, because the way in which Vancouver seems to be looking at that JT Miller trade is quite interesting, and that they always seem to bring up how, oh yeah, we were on this path, but then the Miller trade derailed us from that path. Terry's on the loose replies one more time, it is a setback though. They lost the cheap, cost-controlled power forward that helps carry a competitive culture. Miller would still have the same value this year as he did last year. I strongly doubt that Miller would have the same value today that he did the day they executed that trade. And I think that's very fair as well, considering the fact that JT went from a guy who had scored 100 points in Vancouver to a guy who was over a point per game with New York, but now is a guy who is on pace for, the worst season he'll ever have as an NHL player since his days in Tampa Bay? This season right here, just strictly point production-wise, is worse than every single Vancouver Canucks year that JT Miller ever had. So, if by some miracle the Rangers were to pull off a JT Miller trade in 2025 today, there's no shot that they would get as much stuff that Vancouver was able to get for Miller back when they traded him last season. His value has gone down. Pretty much, right? And that is essentially the point that Thomas Drance is going out there and making. It's because Miller is worse now, Vancouver dodged a bullet. It's not like they lost their way on a competitive track. Now, that's one perspective. Another perspective, this is what Brando went out there and said, this isn't a knock on Elias Pettersson, but I'd be willing to bet my life savings that if Petey was traded instead of Miller, none of these Hughes talks would be happening. You'd save $3.6 million, get a bigger haul back from the trade because you had gotten Pettersson off, and likely sign Suter or Roslovic. And I'm honestly not too sure about that point. Yes, JT was coming off of a 100-point campaign, and he was in the midst of this weird locker room battle drama situation when he got traded. But are we forgetting that Elias Pettersson, at the time of the Miller trade, was exhibiting one of the worst seasons he's ever had as an NHL player? Screw that. No, this was the worst season that he ever had as a National Hockey League player. His value couldn't have been worse. Yes, he's younger, but he's also more expensive. So the idea that Vancouver would have gotten more in an Elias Pettersson trade versus JT, I honestly do challenge that a little bit. But I do acknowledge these other points. You would have saved money, and you probably could have signed a Suter or a Roslovic. Nikhil goes out there and says, I disagree, and I don't really care about either of those guys anymore. At least Marty Natchez would be fun to watch than EP. The team is cooked regardless. So, yeah, there's a pretty bleak and cynical view to look at in regards to the Vancouver Canucks. But I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the Miller-Petey situation 1 year later, now that we've gotten trades done and now we're looking at this other Hughes situation? Do you think it was a bullet dodged for Vancouver? Do you think JT would have had a better impact on this team had he stuck around instead of Petey? And what are your thoughts on how this could have affected the Quinn Hughes talks? Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Roll 99. And Bye.